So here we come to the skill of a chef. A very basic one that can tell me whether someone is a trained chef or not, which is the chopping of an onion in fine little dice. We got the onions with the root in, and I cut the onion in half from the roots down. So having two nice flat onions, and what I do, keeping the root away from the blade, I will do what is called the finger walk, which means I lift up the knife onto the onion and I slowly move the fingers back, taking that as a guideline for the slices of the onions still kept together by the root. You will see that in a minute. Of course, you don't need to have the same speed. So you prepare all the onions this way so you get one skill under your belt. So I repeat it. You get it as fine as you can. The bit with the thumb might be a bit of a scary thing, but halve it. So the two onions and repeat. Meanwhile, the pot over there is getting very hot indeed. And next I go across once this way, and then very fine cutting across the slices that I keep for my stock. I repeat that with all the onions I got. Eventually you should get the speed that I'm going now. Just buy yourself a whole sack of onions and you eventually go there. Sorry, I forgot this. Too much talking. And as you can see, there's a fair amount of onions. And that is what will produce the thickness of the sauce and the flavor. If I had shallots, I would use those. So I got the pot ready. As you can see, I turn around so you can see better. I put some oil in it and should be fairly hot, just to cover the bottom of the pan. I'm using rapeseed oil because it's quite healthy. And a wooden spoon, and I put my onions in. So you can see they start frying straight away in a hot oil. Break them up so they are frying nicely. We want to achieve a golden sort of brown color, what we call caramelized. So leave it there, and every now and then I will go back and stir them, make them up nicely. So I go back to my chopping board, and what we do next, you will need a small pot. This one is not good for electric, but I borrow it from my next door neighbor. And what we do is crush the black peppercorn. Before doing that, I just put a tiny bit of salt on the board. And that will prevent the peppercorn from rolling all over the place too much. And then a fair amount of black peppercorn, depends on your taste. It will not be as strong as you think by the end because it's finished with cream. So I put it down on the salt, a bit more. You can only make this sauce in a fair amount of quantity. Probably we're talking about at least a pint. So what I do next, I use the heel of the pot to crush the black peppercorn. You need a fairly solid backing to the board. So I put a cloth underneath it, and hopefully I got enough body behind it to take it. And at an angle, I put my weight on it, and you can hear the peppercorn already cracking nicely. We don't want it too fine because we want some body to it, some sort of presence in our sauce. And that's sufficient. Great. Meanwhile, I put my stock. Want to warm is about twice as much stock as I have in wine, and the choice of the stock depends what you're going to use the sauce for. If it's chicken, obviously chicken stock. This is beef, beef. This is vegetable, vegetable. You can see the onions there becoming fairly golden in color. At this stage, I'll put in my peppercorn. Try not to put too much of the salt in. Though we need some, we don't need as much as that. And just mix them in nicely. I clean as I go along, which is a good practice. And next thing, once the onions is fairly well colored and the heat is up, I'll put in a tiny bit of tomato puree to give a bit of color as well as a bit of flavor. About the equivalent of a couple of teaspoons or a dessert spoon. This is it. And just make sure the whole lot becomes fairly well mixed in. And slightly golden or brown. You can see the bottom of the pan becoming a bit sticky. Don't worry too much, as long as it doesn't go too dark. At the moment, I got all the bits together, and the peppercorn with the heat will release a bit of its flavor far more than you would with the ground pepper or the cracked peppercorn that you can buy. You can see they're going quite brown, and I want that for a bit of color in my sauce too. But keep sure that you are stirring frequently. And now the wine. All it does, just pour it in, mix it in, and next thing is to add a couple of bay leaves, nice and fresh if you got them in a garden, or any sort of hardy herbs you can find except sage. So a bit of rosemary, thyme will do. And as you can see, just steaming away. So I got all the bits off my spatula, and you can see it's boiling quite fiercely. What we want to do is reduce it to about a third of its original volume. So I pause here and come back in a few minutes. Right, I'm back. The wine is reduced. It takes about 5-10 minutes, depends on the heat and the sort of pot you got. And I got now twice as much stock as I have in my wine. And oops, mix it up nicely. Pour nearly all of it in. Keep some back, maybe to correct the thickness later on. And repeat the process of reduction that we done with the wine. So boil it fairly fiercely until it's reduced, then again by a third, or to a third, sorry. So pause it again and I'll come back in a minute. Now here we are back. It might take as long as 20 minutes, half an hour, or even longer, depends on the quantity. But we really need to have that concentrated sort of flavor and almost thicken it up with the onions breaking up into it. So at this stage it should be fairly shiny, the sauce, although you can't see much because of the steam, but it should have quite a lot of taste. And I got my little spoon in water. So what I do is now remove the bay leaves. To find them. There it is, hiding. And thicken it up using a bit of gravy granules, or in a trade we would use a thickening agent sorry, which is a beurre manière, which is butter and flour mixed together, and little at a time to the right consistency. We want a coat, oops, one fell in, consistency. Little at a time, make sure it boils and thickens up. And I got a fair amount of sauce there. It's probably enough for about a serving of 6 people here, as it is fairly strong, and it has to go with some kind of meat or chicken or poultry. Mine is a chicken one, so I'll be using that with a very quickly pan-fried chicken breast, sliced it nicely and put the sauce on top. But you could use, classically, it should be a fillet steak, but as they say in France, they say on n'a pas toujours du caviar, which means we don't always have caviar. I probably would use this with meatballs, which is the favorite of the SKE school at Haysbridge. Right, the thickening is nearly there. And it's still boiling fiercely. So now I switch off the heat and check the thickening I want. The way to check it is to put my spoon in and turn it around, and you should have a nice coating, a shiny coating of the sauce. Give it a last sort of taste. Yeah, it's quite strong. Tiny bit of gravy granule, just a tiny bit, because I want to make sure that the sauce thicken up nicely for coating quite thickly. And I'm just now working on the residue heat, so it's just simmering. Continue stirring, make sure it doesn't catch, because that's the stage when it's thick and catches. And I pour in double cream and just check the color. Should have sort of a coffee color. Depends on the wine. Tiny bit more because it's a cream sauce, and of course it's a French sauce too, which is a cracked black peppercorn cream sauce. No more boiling from this stage, but certainly tasting. And that's okay. If you want to, you can add some more salt, definitely no pepper, and all I have to do is have it ready for service in a nice sauce boat. So it's mixed up nicely. Oh, it's peppery. And there it is. Cream black pepper sauce. Happy cooking. See you, I hope soon, at Haysbridge, my chefs. Bye.